This week's episode of Discovering Trek is brought to you exclusively by Fansets. Keep listening for this week's code for a special offer just for Discovering Trek listeners. Discover a whole new universe of pin collectibles with Fansets online at fansets.com.
A Klingon coup? Lorca wants to win no matter what the cost. And, the Klingons ate Giorgio. Episode 4 of Star Trek Discovery opens up some very interesting questions and maybe even some concerns. We're going to try to get to the heart of what's happening on the USS Discovery right now. I'm your host, Dan Davidson, and we are Discovering Trek. Welcome, one and all, to episode 4 of Discovering Trek, the Star Trek Discovery Companion, presented by Fansets. Again, my name is Dan Davidson, and we are so happy that you're joining us for what we know is going to be another great discussion about Star Trek Discovery. As always, this is the place to get the most in-depth discussion and analysis about the latest episode of Star Trek Discovery. And tonight, it's all about episode 4, The Butcher's Knife Cares Not for the Lamb's Cry. In addition, we're going to get our thoughts as to what we think might happen next. And most importantly, we're going to discuss what this week's episode helped us discover about our very own humanity. And just as Captain Lorca depends on Saru while on the bridge of the Discovery, so do I put all my faith and hopes into my number one here on Discovering Trek. I am so happy and proud to welcome my friend, my brother in Trek, and my amazing co-host, Bill Smith. Bill, glad to have you here as always, buddy. And this episode was not what I was expecting.
I have to agree with you. Thanks, Dan. What a great welcome. I appreciate that. I have to say, first off, I'm not nearly as tall as Saru, so that could be a problem. If you have a nice box I could stand on, that would go so well. But there is a lot to unpack in episode 4 of Discovery for sure.
Oh, lots of questions and lots of, I don't know if concerns is the right word, but stuff that I was watching and I was just like, oh my goodness, I can't believe that we're seeing this in a Star Trek episode. But we're going to get into all of that later on. I think right now, though, man, you've got a very, very special guest that you want to welcome to the show.
Indeed, I do, my friend. I used to torment our guest this week every weekend when I would post random and obscure screenshots to our Camp Kittimer Facebook group during my Saturday morning TOS rewatch. Listeners of Trek Geeks will recall that he joined us in our See It or Skip It on Next Generation Season 2, and today he joins us on the premier Discovery Discussion podcast. He's the host of Starbase 66 on the Simply Syndicated network of podcasts. I actually said that right this time. He's our great friend, Rick Tetreault. And Rick, welcome to Discovering Trek.
Thank you very much, guys. It's a great pleasure to be here. I think I may be like 1 for 50 on those Trek screen caps. So, and I think that was the softball you tossed me, or you actually gave me one I could identify.
Every now and then, right?
But it's great to be here. This is a great time to be a Star Trek fan, and I'm really looking forward to talking about this episode with y'all tonight.
Oh, you said it, man. It is a great time. New Star Trek on television for the first time in 12 years. It's awesome. We are thrilled to welcome you to the podcast. And I'm sure that we're going to have some very interesting things to say as we dissect what we just saw in episode 4. But before we do that, Bill, why don't you open up a shit-wide channel to let listeners know how they can get in touch with us to talk about The Butcher's Knife, abbreviated.
Priority 1 message from Starfleet coming in on secured channel.
You can find us on Twitter at Discovering Trek, and on Facebook, you can find us at facebook.com/Discovering Trek. There, you can join in on the discussion, leave us comments, questions, suggestions, your thoughts on the episode. We want to hear it all. Also, remember, you can send us a voicemail at speakpipe.com/TrekGeeks. Do remember, though, that any comments you leave us may be used in an upcoming episode of Discovering Trek. Dan.
Spoiler alert. Spoiler alert. Spoiler alert.
Ladies and gentlemen, from here on in, this episode of Discovering Trek contains spoilers. So if you haven't watched episode 4 of Star Trek Discovery, stop listening right now. Go on over to CBS All Access and watch the latest episode, because failure to do that, you are going to risk finding out plot developments and character details, for the butcher's knife cares not for the lamb's cry.
Michael Burnham is in her quarters and about to do something she hasn't done in over 6 months. Put on a Starfleet uniform. She's been temporarily assigned to the science division with no rank. Tilly enters as Burnham looks at herself in a mirror. Tilly's delivering a package. When Burnham goes to open it, the computer informs her that it's the last will and testament of Captain Philippa Giorgio. Burnham shoves it under her bunk and leaves for the bridge. She encounters Saru in the turbo lift. Saru is displeased that she's aboard and that he was kept out of the loop on that decision. Burnham notices the Kelpian's threat ganglia is exposed and assures him that she is not a threat. He's not convinced. What a shock. They arrive at the bridge and it's in full combat mode. They've engaged the Klingons. Shots are traded and the Discovery is destroyed. Or it would have been if this weren't a battle drill. Lorca is quite unhappy, and he explains that the Discovery is the only ship in Starfleet with the experimental Spore drive engine. That means they can go anywhere instantaneously, but when they do, they'll be alone. There's no backup. Lorca brings Burnham to his lab. He says they need to survive and that he has a better use for Burnham's skills than working on Stamets' project. Lorca shows Burnham his collection of weapons. Some of them are the deadliest in the galaxy. He also introduces her to his latest addition, the creature from the USS Glenn. Like Lorca, it also has an aversion to light. Lorca wants Burnham to weaponize the creature, especially because what it did to the Klingons aboard the USS Glenn. Voq and L'Rell are still aboard T'Kuvma's ship. For 6 months, they've been searching the debris field from the battle at the binary stars for a bird of prey engine to restart their ship. Problem is, there isn't one. L'Rell thinks they should take the engine from the wreckage of the Shenzhou. Voq does not want to pollute T'Kuvma's ship with technology from the people who killed him. L'Rell has a conversation with him about the uselessness of purity and tells him to build a bridge for his people. Landry joins Burnham in Lorca's lab. She's eager to find a way to weaponize the creature, but Burnham points out that the creature resembles a microscopic organism and is likely not actually aggressive. Landry doesn't care, and she's determined to find a way to utilize it for Lorca's war effort. Lorca gets contacted by an admiral with a distress call. The dilithium mining colony on Corvin 2 is under attack by the Klingons, and the Discovery is the only ship that has a chance at getting there if they use the Spore drive. Lorca promises that they can make the jump, but when he talks to Stamets, they argue about it. Stamets can't figure out how to fully load what they brought back from the Glen, and he agrees to make some adjustments to try to make the long jump happen. Cole joins L'Rell and Voq on T'Kuvma's ship. He apologizes for his insults before the beginning of the war. Cole wants T'Kuvma's ship with its cloaking technology back in the fight. Voq explains their situation, but offers the ship and the aid of House T'Kuvma to Cole. That really doesn't sound like it's going to go well for the Son of None, now does it? The Discovery is ready to make the jump to Corvin 2, and Lorca puts the ship on black alert. The creature from the Glen seems agitated as the Spore drive begins to spin. Literally. No, really, the ship is spinning. The Discovery makes the jump, but ends up in the gravity well of a star instead of their intended destination. They, of course, manage to break free. Burnham shows Landry that the creature reacted before the ship made the jump, and it's likely connected to the Spore drive. Landry doesn't care. That seems to be her thing. That information doesn't help Lorca. In sickbay, Stamets and Lorca argue about trying to make scientific progress work in a time of war. Stamets leaves, and Lorca plays the distress calls from Corvin 2 for the entire ship to hear. Landry grabs one of Lorca's weapons from the collection. She fills the creature's cove with a sedative and releases it. But the creature goes berserk instead. It gets hold of Landry and mauls her. Burnham turns the lights up to full and the creature retreats to its holding pen. Burnham then brings Landry to sickbay, but she's earned her red shirt. Lorca doesn't want Landry's death to be in vain, and he wants Burnham to get back to work now. Voq and L'Rell search the Shenzhou wreckage. They locate and retrieve the dilithium processor. Voq wonders if L'Rell doubted T'Kuvma for naming Voq leader over her. L'Rell says she never wanted to lead, and Voq says he's fortunate to have her. Burnham summons Saru to Lorca's lab. She feigns an apology to draw him closer to the creature and notices that his threat ganglia don't react in any way. That makes her sure that the creature is not a predator and was acting in a defensive manner. Saru is annoyed and says Burnham will fit right in with Lorca. Tilly brings a canister of spores to Burnham. Burnham opens them in the creature's containment pen and she releases the spores. And the creature reacts in a friendly manner. Aw. Burnham shows the footage from the Glen to Stamets and demonstrates that the crew was trying to contain something in the lab and not the other way around. Burnham believes the tardigrade creature found its way onto the Glen and that it was the means the Glen used to control the spores and achieve success with the new spore drive. Stamets and Burnham bring the creature down to the mushroom forest. The creature has a symbiotic relationship that allows it and the spores to communicate, which could make the creature useful as a navigator. Voq and L'Rell return to D'Kuvma's ship to find the Klingons on board feasting on provisions from Cole's ship, the price of their loyalty. He is convinced that once the war is over, the Klingon houses will be at odds again, and the cloaking technology will belong to Cole. L'Rell also kind of betrays Voq, siding with Cole, or does she? The Discovery is back on black alert. They jump to Corvin 2 thanks to Ripper the Tardigrade Navigator, who has essentially been enslaved to that role, and Burnham realizes this. They find themselves in the midst of the battle with several Klingon birds of prey. The Discovery drops several large explosives to destroy the Klingon ships and then jumps away. The miners in the colony are safe, and they have no idea who saved them. Voq is abandoned on board the Shenzhou to die. Thanks, Call. L'Rell teleports in behind him, and she tells him that she only betrayed him to save his life. She has a plan to show that Voq is worthy to unite the houses, and she will send him to the matriarchs of House Mokai. Burnham visits the tardigrade in the containment pen and brings him another canister of the spores. However, the creature no longer trusts her. Tilly finds Burnham in their room. She encourages Burnham to open Giorgio's will. Tilly leaves to give her privacy, and a hologram of Giorgio plays. She assumes that Burnham has her own command now. She's left her most treasured possession in order to encourage her to continue to explore the mysteries of the universe. Giorgio says she is proud of Burnham, as if she were her own daughter. Burnham opens the package to find the telescope from Giorgio's office aboard the Shenzhou.
You know, Bill, as we go through these recaps every week, you just sound better and better, my friend. Well done. Excellent job, as always.
Thank you. I have to say, they're making it pretty easy for me to recap these things because the stories are amazing.
Yeah, the stories are indeed amazing. And Rick, what are your first thoughts on the episode before we actually get into discussion points? Did you like it? Did you not like it? You got some questions that you want to ask? What are your thoughts, man?
This was the first one of the series that I loved from the opening moment to the ending credits. I went into the show with an open mind because I learned my lesson with TNG that you can't expect any new Trek to be exactly what you want it to be. And I was one of the haters on TNG before it ever premiered, and then now I'm love it. Well, not every minute of it from about Measure of a Man on. And so I've tried to keep an open mind with the show, and I've really enjoyed it. But there have been a few moments where I was like, "Oh, okay, we'll ride along with this." I loved last night's show. I watched it twice last night so that I could be prepared for this, and it was not in any way an effort. It was a joy to watch it 2 times in a row. I love what they're doing with the Klingons. I think that a lot of the naysaying about what's happening with the Klingons, I'm starting to see some foreshadowing, and I'll save my thoughts for that for when we get to the long range scans later. But I think we're starting to see that the worries about the Klingons are unfounded, in my opinion.
Interesting stuff. I can't help but agree. I do have some things about last night's show that I found a little bit, I don't know if disturbing is the right word, but Bill, before we get into discussion points, what were your thoughts overall on last night's episode?
I have to say, I thought it was an extremely strong outing. And upon rewatch, I think it left me with more questions than answers. And I don't want to tip my hand too much. But I have to say that in this one episode, there was so much Star Trek and then so much anti Star Trek that afterwards I felt like I had a bit of a conundrum going on, if that makes sense.
Wow, that makes great sense. And that's a good way to put it, because I was thinking some similar thoughts as to what was not Star Trek about this episode. And we'll get into that in a few moments. But right now, I want to start with some of the discussion points, guys. And let's start with the Klingons. Rick, you just talked about them a few minutes ago. It was a very Klingon-heavy episode. We haven't seen them for a couple of weeks, so it was good to see. One of the things that I liked right off the bat is that we see Cole finally make his move, and what a move it was, Rick.
Yeah. Cole is, he's of the House of Core, so we know he's, power hungry and probably more than a little duplicitous. I got a kick out of the way he came on board and was deferential to Vok until Vok turned his back, basically, and then what we're seeing now is a Klingon empire that is pretty much just an empire in name only, and it seems like it's more like a pirate island as opposed to an organized entity. And so Cole just sweeps in and scoops up Vok's people with the promise of food and getting the heck out of the Badlands there or whatever. I love what they're doing with the Klingons. I've always liked the Klingons, and each iteration of them has been more interesting, I thought, although I don't think anyone has ever touched John Colicos's core for just absolute menace. But the what we're seeing of them, they're so alien now. And do we want to get into the icky part right away?
Why not?
They ate Captain Georgiou, which I've seen a lot of ew responses online about that. And I thought it was awesome because it was so matter of fact, the way they just sort of, you weren't complaining when you were chewing the skin off her smooth skull kind of thing. I think it just shows that this is a race that is very unlike anything we've encountered before.
I have to agree. One of the things first of all, when that happened, I actually looked up at my wife and I was like, did I just hear that right? They ate her flesh? Okay. But then I started thinking, we always hear in TNG and Deep Space Nine with Klingons that they have no problem eating the heart of their victims or so forth. So it made sense, but it was a shock and awe moment to the nth degree. Do you agree, Bill?
Oh, absolutely. When I first heard that, my ears really kind of perked up and I was like, huh? I was stunned. And then I thought about it upon subsequent rewatches. And, we do hear, like you said, Dan, about Klingons eating the hearts of their victims in some instances, but it made me wonder if this is part of the throwback to, what T'Kuvma was trying to usher in. That sort of Klingon fundamentalism we've referred to in the past by bringing back the ways of Kahless. Perhaps this was something ancient, which is why we've never heard about it in subsequent iterations of Klingons going forward. I thought it was shocking. I thought it was a great bit of depth for the Klingons in this series. And I got to admit, I'm turning out to be a Cole guy. I love Cole. He saw there was a power vacuum. He swept in. He said, oh, what? They haven't eaten? Oh, I got food for days, yo. Let's do this. And he completely took advantage of the fact that those Klingons needed to be led, and he brought them in. So I can't wait to see what happens next. I'm totally loving what they're doing with Cole, and I can't wait to see how challenged he is by other Klingons.
I think it's pretty safe to assume that right now he is the quote unquote bad guy, at least on the Klingon side of the house. We still have the Starfleet and Federation side of the house, which is a totally different animal. But yeah, it looks like he has cemented himself firmly in the grounds of the guy that we will love to hate, sort of like a Gul Dukat or maybe even a Kai Wynn type of character. he swooped in and made his move, like you said. And Bill, I want to stay with you for just a second. Let's talk about that swoop in, and let's talk about Voak and L'Rell. She's got something up her sleeve too, I think, and it was kind of interesting to see how she played that. I could kind of tell right from the get-go that she had something plotting, the way that she was darting her eyes around at the time that she looked like she was, going over to Cole's side. What did you make out of all of that?
Well, I think that L'Rell is fascinating. We know that she's a Klingon of two houses, and I think to some extent she's playing both of those houses against each other, or at least against the middle, to try to get what she wants, because I think she wants that power. She was on board the ship. Obviously, she wasn't named, the successor to T'Kuvma, and probably wanted it to be that way, but she's kind of like Lady Macbeth, right? She can sit in the shadows and orchestrate and pull strings, and there's Voq just sort of, willing to go along with it. Because ultimately he just wants to be part of the Klingon Empire as a son of none. So I think that she is going to be quite a player, and I think that Cole is not quite sure what he's up against, or doesn't know what he's up against just yet.
I think it's very interesting, Rick, that at one point, L'Rell made it very clear that Voq was going to have to sacrifice, quote, everything in order to get back what he had just lost. How do you read into how that all played out towards the end of the episode?
I love L'Rell. I will say I didn't for a minute think she had turned against Voq when she pretended to go with Cole. The thing I can't figure out about her is she playing the long con, or is she really enamored of Voq as she's acting? And I think that's going to be an interesting development to see how that plays out. But yeah, she's definitely Lady Macbeth is exactly what I was thinking too. She is setting Voq up for something, whether it's good or bad, whether it's to his advantage or to hers or both. I for a minute there, I thought we were gonna see some what was it, Parmok?
Nice, very nice. Guys, one of the things I thought was great was I didn't expect this. It took me a second to realize it. It's been 6 months since the battle at the Binary Stars. They're still there, putting their ship back together. I thought that was a great scene when they were showing that map, that 3D map. But I will say I want to bring out something, and I want to get your opinion. And Rick, I'll start with you. One of the things that I don't want to say it's bothering me about the Klingons, but it is something that I thought about for the first episode and neglected to bring it up on episode 1 of Discovering Trek is I understand and I love the fact that the producers and writers of the show are having the Klingons talk in Klingon almost all of the time. Barely ever see them speak English, and I think that's great. It shows the culture and the heritage and so forth. I can't help but be a little bit distracted because I'm reading at the same time that I'm trying to watch what's going on screen. Do you guys have the same problem, or am I just a dummy?
I don't disagree. In fact, when I watched it for the second time last night, I was trying to not read the subtitles and to watch their performances. I'm kind of the same mind. I love that they're speaking Klingon. And on the Trek after show, or After Trek rather, the executive producer, and I can't think of his name offhand, he even said that they had talked about maybe doing like a Red October sort of thing where they zoomed in on somebody's mouth and then switched to English, and they decided to stay with the Klingon. And I admire the consistency. With some people, with some of the actors, it works. Mary Chieffo. Any idea?
Mary Chieffo, yep.
Mm-hmm. She acts through the Klingon language beautifully.
Yes.
Others like Voq, not so much.
Okay.
And I had that problem with T'Kuvma too. And he even said he was, he had to learn it phonetically, and he was having a real trouble, with the prosthetics and all of that stuff, and speaking these words and acting at the same time, trying to remember all of it. Right. I honestly don't know what the solution would be. I would hate to see them lose that alienness. But on the other hand, reading it all the time can be a little annoying is not really the right word, but distracting. I think
Right.
it's taking something from the performances.
Okay. Bill, somebody as smart as you, did you have any trouble with that, or were you on the same boat?
I'm of two minds of it. I largely don't mind it. It does force me to pay more attention during those scenes because I have to read it. But like Rick said, I want to see what the actors are doing too, and I usually catch that on subsequent rewatches. I do love how it sounds though, because I think it fits the visual aesthetic. I think if they were all speaking English, it might not seem nearly as serious or like a moment that doesn't have as much gravity behind it. So I do think it adds something special. I do think it adds a more feature film-like quality necessarily.
Okay.
I do wish they'd maybe have a few more English scenes because obviously we know they can speak English because D'Couvma did in the episode 1 and 2 at various points. But ultimately, I think I'm okay with it.
Okay. I think you're going to get your wish next week because in the coming attractions, it looks like Lorella's going to be talking a lot of English to Captain Lorca. So that'll be interesting to see. Let's talk about the Spore Drive a little bit. A very interesting happenings last week. We finally get to see it in action. Before we get into the actual Spore Drive itself, I think that one of the things that I loved most about this episode was the discussion about the Spore Drive and the science behind it when Stamets stood up to Lorca in sickbay. That was amazing stuff right in front of another officer. It shows that he has some very strong feelings against what he's being forced to do. And Bill, that episode or that scene in the episode stood out to me as one of the best.
Without a doubt. In the previous episode, I saw some complaints that people thought Stamets was kind of grouchy or irritable or standoffish. And I think it took this episode to really show me that this guy is what Starfleet's about. We theorized that in the last episode of Discovering Trek a little bit, but he's a scientist. He's an explorer. He doesn't want to be at war. He doesn't want to be in this position. So I understand why he's at odds with Lorca and isn't afraid to challenge him. And I thought it provided some fantastic conflict. It's one of those times where I'm psyched where, the legendary Roddenberry rule that people made way too big a deal of has kind of been thrown out because I love scenes like that. I really do.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. We're definitely not seeing that rule so far in Discovery. And Rick, speaking of the Spore Drive, I know that some people I've seen on social media have had problems with, this is something that is taking place before Kirk and Spock's Enterprise, and we're seeing this technology that we never saw or heard of before in any of the future iterations of Star Trek. What do you think about the Spore Drive so far and what we've seen?
Yeah, I've heard those arguments too. I've thought it myself at some points. However, I think it's pretty clear that the Discovery is, for want of a better term, a black ops ship, totally experimental. And we have now seen, much like a few other episodes in different series, that at least as of this point, in order for it to work, it requires the shall we be generous and say discomfort of a living creature to function. I think that is the out that they've given themselves, that once the war is over, then this drive will no longer be ethical to use and it will go away.
That is that's what we call a brilliant segue, my friend, because definitely the biggest discussion point I wanted to bring in for this week was, of course, Ripper, what they have named. I believe it's called the tardigrade, if I'm pronouncing it correctly. This is where I kind of had some moments during the episode where I was kind of, holding my hands up against my chest and kind of squeezing a little bit because I was a little uncomfortable with what we were seeing. Just a couple of basic questions, and Rick, will stay with you. Is this torture? Is this slavery? Is it betrayal? All of these things. What's going on, and how are we feeling about what we're seeing Ripper go through? What are your thoughts on what you saw, what they were doing with this? I don't want to call it creature, but as far as we know, that's what we should call it, is about this creature or this being.
Yeah. Oh, it's absolutely all three of those things. And if we did not have Sonequa Martin Green's wonderful face acting during the whole jump scenes, I would have been totally turned off by this. It might have been a deal breaker. But the fact that she's appalled by what's happening with this animal, Lorca doesn't know yet. So I don't know what his response will be, but I've got a pretty good idea. Stamets, I was talking about this with my wife tonight at dinner because I was disappointed in his reaction, but as she pointed out, he wasn't really noticing the tardigrade either. He was just psyched that his drive was working. Only Burnham was watching Ripper and seeing the agony he was in, or it was in. I think that the reactions to that are going to be hopefully a major plot point from here on.
Yeah. I gotta agree with you there. I was discussing the episode with my wife afterwards last night, and I'll be honest, I haven't been able to watch it again. I've only watched it once, and because it was a strong reaction that I had to it. And we were talking last night, and she said, Dan, nobody sees how it's reacted. We can't go on what's on the other ship's logs because they've been contaminated or they're corrupted. So nobody sees if they felt the same way or if they just didn't care and were doing the experiment anyway. And that's why it started, killing everybody on board. She's the only one besides us, the viewers, who have actually seen the reactions of Ripper. And I'm hoping that plays in later. I'm scared to death that Lorca's not going to care. But at the same time, I'm very hopeful. Bill, what do you think, man? I know that you're an animal lover just like I am. So what do you think?
I'm going to go back to your original questions and answer them in order. Yes, it is torture. Yes, it is absolutely slavery. And not only is it a betrayal, but it's a betrayal of everything that Starfleet is and stands for. To paraphrase Jean-Luc Picard in Star Trek Insurrection, how many life forms does it take before it's wrong? It's horrifying. And I think that's what you see on Burnham's face. And in the midst of that moment, people are in engineering celebrating their successful jump. These are people who are supposed to be what Starfleet stands for as far as we know. I have to caveat it that way because we don't know much about this crew or this captain, really. But the thing that really turned my stomach was that they were celebrating while the tardigrade is there in the reaction cube suffering. And as a result, it no longer trusts Burnham because she goes back after that, tries to give it more spores, and it really doesn't want much to do with her. And honestly, I can't blame it.
Right. That was a gut-wrenching moment when it just backed away. And you could tell that she was hurt because she knew what she helped partake in.
Yeah.
Not only that whole scene, guys, was troublesome to me with the jump and seeing it suffering in the chamber, but also in the beginning in the lab with Landry. Landry didn't care what Burnham thought. She just wanted the mission that Lorca assigned to them. And I thought it was interesting. I'm going to read a quote from Burnham from last night's episode that I felt was very strong in what we were seeing at the time. Quote, "You judge the creature by its appearance and by one single incident from its past. Nothing in its biology suggests it would attack except in self-defense. Commander, the creature is an unknown alien. It can only be what it is and not what you want it to be." That was a great, great quote. And I wrote that down as fast as I could at the time it happened, because it shows that she's thinking more about just the mission, which seems to be a problem that a lot of other people on the ship don't do. Rick, what are your thoughts on that?
Oh, you're so right. That was an awesome quote. Landry was an interesting character, and it pains me to have to say was.
Yeah,
I think Rekha Sharma was amazing and is amazing, and I want her to be on every show all the time. But her devotion to Lorca, just because we haven't, I want to say it borders on inappropriate, but I would not be surprised if we find out that there was something more between the two. But I would also not be surprised if it wasn't, because with Lorca, I haven't got him pegged yet. But she was absolutely devoted to him. And, she even said it, anything you need anytime, or, whatever she said in the last episode.
Yes.
I think that there was more than just, an admiration for a commanding officer where she was concerned. So all other priorities were rescinded in her mind. So yeah, being, she was kind of sharing his the ends justify the means mindset of this creature in here is nothing more than a weapon, and we need to figure out how to use it. Whereas Burnham is looking at it as a being, because she's coming from her Vulcan, and the Vulcans, for all their uptight attitudes and stuff, they respect all life. Whether they're polite to it or not is another thing, but
Right.
And that's where she's coming from, of I need to understand this being, not I need to exploit this animal. And I think that's the dichotomy there between Lorca and Landry and Burnham.
Well, and I think this episode, in addition to this horrifying moment, gives all of us Trekkies a moment where we realize Star Trek is alive and well. And it's the moment where they realize that the tardigrade isn't going to attack them, and only attacked before out of self-defense. When they beam it into the, I don't know what to call it, the mushroom garden, for want of a better word, the Spore land. And when Stamets and Burnham are observing it, that's a very, very classic Star Trek moment. And as a fan, I said to myself, oh yeah, they get it. They are showing us pure Star Trek fundamentals here. So there was that moment, and it was balanced out, or kind of shaded out, by what happened to the tardigrade afterwards.
Right.
Yeah.
Just Bill, do you see any ethical ramifications for what we saw last night?
Tons.
Yeah, good way to put it.
I mean, I don't know any other way to put it, because, I saw some people online today saying, well, this isn't what Starfleet is. And I don't think it is what Starfleet is. I think it's what the Discovery is.
Yes.
In earlier predictions, some people said they thought this was Section 31. I don't think it's Section 31 anymore. I think that it's, along the same lines of your standard Badmiral. I think that Lorca kind of is keeping information from both the right and left hands, and is sort of plowing his own path, because he's damaged. I think he's really damaged. And I think that he's out to win this war for some reason we don't know yet, at whatever cost. And all of the Starfleet principles that we all hold dear as fans are getting thrown out the window.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think damaged is a good word. And based on what we saw for the coming attractions for next week, looks like he might get a little bit more damaged. But we'll get to that afterwards. Rick, you actually brought up something a few minutes ago when you talked about the death of one of the characters. So right now, we want to introduce a new part of the podcast.
He's dead, Jim. He's dead, Jim. He's dead, Jim. He's dead, Jim.
Yes, it's called the Red Shirt Roll Call, folks. We've talked about on Discovery, we are probably going to lose people that we get attached to very quickly. We've already seen that a few times, so we figured it'd be a good idea to make this a weekly talking point. And Bill, I know that we've lost some people previously. Why don't you run through that list real quick, and then let's talk about who we lost last night.
Absolutely, Dan. In the prior episodes, 1, 2, and 3, we've lost some significant characters, characters that we've already developed an appreciation or even an affection for. And they include Ensign Connor, who, of course, was blown out into space when the hull of the Shenzhou was compromised. Captain Giorgio herself on the Klingon ship. And then right after her, Takuvma at the hands of Burnham. Of course, we can't forget the prison shuttle pilot in episode 3 whose tether was snapped and she went wandering off into space.
Everybody else forgot her.
I know. Everybody else forgot her, including the prisoners. And then we also can't forget the guy I pointed out last week who wasn't going to make it through the episode, security dude Kelsky, who was captured by the tardigrade, and we assume he's dead. They are the ones who have gone before now, Dan, and it was rough, each and every one of them.
Every one of them's rough. That prison shuttle pilot, I still hold a candle to that young woman. But this week was tough. I personally was a very big fan of Commander Landry. And I think she's been taken from us far, far too soon. What do you think, Rick?
Yeah, I was really starting to like her character, idealism and ruthlessness aside, and I was stunned. I had kind of forgotten that we live in this is Star Trek in the age of Game of Thrones. So, although, did y'all catch the sick bay sound effects when they were trying to save her life?
Yes.
Absolutely beautiful. Speaking of sick bay, of course, we saw Landry. She didn't look too good in sick bay. I will be honest. We've mentioned it a little bit. There were some people online who really didn't take a liking to Commander Landry. Bill, are you one of those people, or did you like her just as much as Rick and I did?
I think I fall somewhere in the middle. I didn't dislike her. I thought her character was a little one note, but I don't think we'd learned enough about Landry to figure out why she was that way. Honestly, if she were an Enterprise, she probably would have been a Mako and everybody would have been fine with it. But Here she was on the Discovery aboard a Starfleet vessel as a Starfleet officer, and we just didn't know enough about Landry. So I do think she's gone too soon. I do love Rekha Sharma. She's wonderful in just about everything she's in, whether it's Battlestar Galactica or even our favorite fan production, Star Trek Continues. And I have to say, we'll have to raise a synthahol in her honor later on.
It's too bad. I was hoping for more than just 2 episodes, but when we see guest starring, we know it might be happening. But rest in peace to all those fine people from Starfleet and from the Klingon Empire that you mentioned, Bill. As soon as we get back from this brief message, we're going to deep dive into what we thought this episode meant about our humanity.
Dan, this week's episode is brought to us by Fansets, the exclusive sponsor for Discovering Trek. Fansets is the place for all your collectible pin needs, whether it's Marvel, DC, Harry Potter, Firefly, or Dan, even a little show called Star Trek. Fansets has just a pan for your pan? Just a pin for your favorite genre. Head on over to fansets.com and check out their vast library of products and accessories. Plus, Dan, I don't know if you knew this, we have an exclusive offer just for Discovering Trek listeners for this week only. At checkout, enter the code CORVAN2, that's CORVAN with the number 2 altogether, at checkout for a special 10% off your entire order. But don't wait, Dan. This code is only going to be available to use until next Sunday, October 15th, 2017 at 11:59 p.m. Eastern Time.
That is awesome, as always, Bill. Good stuff. So, as you know, the guys and girls from Fansets just wrapped up another great convention at New York Comic-Con. And from what we saw on social media, us East Coasters were giving them all the love, man.
Well, yeah, and why not? I mean, Dan, they have so many great sets to offer. It makes perfect sense. And something else that makes perfect sense right now is subscribing to their brand new episode pins. Isn't that right?
Oh, they're absolute perfection. Fansets is now offering the Star Trek Discovery episode pin collection. And what is that, you may ask? Well, it's a unique pin for each of the 15 episodes of Discovery's first season, plus a special season pass pin, which is available for you to order right now at episodepins.com.
So these pins are going to ship in 2 different sets. About 4 to 6 weeks after the 9th episode airs, the first 9 episode pins in the series will go out to subscribers, along with the special season pass holder pin. And then 4 to 6 weeks after the last episode of Star Trek Discovery's first season airs in 2018, the last 6 pins will ship.
Dare I say, Bill, that is fan-set-tastic news? Huh? Yeah? Okay. Anyway, folks, don't delay. In order to get that special season pass pin, you must order the episode collection before midnight on October 29th, 2017. Orders after that date will still receive the 15 episodic pins, but you will not get the additional season pass pin. And again, for more details and to place your order, please head right on over to episodepins.com.
Fansets, a set for every fan and a fan for every set. See their entire line at fansets.com. And as always, we thank our friends so much for being our exclusive sponsor for the entire season of Discovering Trek.
Star Trek has always been and always will be a reflection of our times. And here in this segment, we're going to take a look at what this episode helps us discover about our own humanity, or perhaps what it even tells us about ourselves. So, Rick, a lot to chew on last night, and I'm sorry for the pun. It was not planned. I promise. A lot to chew on last night. What were your thoughts on what did this make you think about ourselves and about our own humanity here in present day?
Well, for all of the people that are out there saying this isn't Trek, there is nothing more Star Trek than the examination of how we deal with other life forms, of how we treat the least of us, to put it into a more earthbound context, how the crew of Discovery is treating and dealing with Ripper. And I hope they change that name, because it is not appropriate, as we have seen. And granted,
True.
as you said, the rest of the crew hasn't seen that. The tardigrade. It's the Horta, it's the Equinox. It's, we've seen this over and over again in Star Trek, but not in a way that's just been like beating this thing into the ground. It's an examination that needs to come up over and over again. It's happening now, right outside our doors and windows at our borders. It's happening in other countries. How we treat other people or other life forms that for some reason or another we've considered to be beneath us or of use to us regardless of their wishes. That is what speaks to how we are as a people. And that is exactly one of the main things Star Trek does a lot. And that's what this show seems to be doing. And right now it's not looking so good.
Yeah, I have to agree. And, that's an excellent comparison when you bring up what happened on the Equinox and Voyager, as well as the Horta from TOS. Very good comparisons, man. Thumbs up. Bill, what about it? What do you got for us for humanity? Because I'm sure you've got some very, very good points.
I struggled with this week, and I haven't in past episodes. It's because I think I had a hard time unpacking a lot of what happens to the tardigrade. And as we record this tonight, I'm holding in my hands the Starfleet Delta. Mm-hmm. And this one piece of jewelry, if you will, because it's the Discovery version, represents so much to so many of us. I have it tattooed on my body, for God's sake. It's a symbol. It represents everything that we hope the future holds. It's the goodness, and it's the humanity evolving past the way it is now. And I understand that each Star Trek is emblematic of the time in which it was produced, and this is also 100% true of Discovery. But it forces me to realize that we are so far from ever being able to use this Starfleet Delta that I hold in my hand, that it's troublesome. As I thought about the humanity in this episode, two very separate thoughts kept entering into my mind. And they are these. They're both essentially quotes. The first one is, "The ends don't justify the means, not in any way." All too often in our history as humans, we take action and then attempt to justify them later because we achieved the end result we wanted. And it's never acceptable, and it's never easy. And I think that Discovery does a great job of showing us that we're still prone to this as humans. We don't want to be. We don't necessarily mean to be, but we are. And there are times when it's pretty disgusting, like it was this week on screen. And then the other one that comes to mind is, Dan, a favorite episode of yours and mine from Star Trek Deep Space Nine. And it's Inter Arma Enim Silent Leges. In a time of war, the laws fall silent, and they do in this case because the Discovery crew is abandoning every principle that Starfleet stands for. There are always going to be those who are ready to suspend law and or common sense to achieve their outcome. And to quote the Federation president in Star Trek VI, The Undiscovered Country, just because we can do a thing does not necessarily follow that we must do that thing. We have to be better than that. In the future, we're supposed to be, but right now, we absolutely are not.
Wow. Yes, I agree. this is not Gene's Star Trek. We talked about this before the show aired, and it's not going to be Gene's Star Trek, but damn it, it is Star Trek. And I think that they're balancing one end of the spectrum with another, and they're doing it in a way that makes us have these kind of discussions, and it's really great. You know, I hate that we as humans seem to never be able to look past outward appearances. And this was so evident with Landry, with the quote that I read earlier from Burnham. You know, she wanted to handle the creature a certain way, and she was basing it on how the creature looked. Just because it looks like a monster and has done things that could be deemed as bad, she's not willing to look past that and see if there's more to it, while Burnham was. And, you know, it's unfortunate. We see that all too often today, and how we treat people that may have made mistakes in the past. And, you know, they've paid their debts to society, and they're always and forever labeled. And I've seen it firsthand, and it really makes me sad. That's one point I wanted to bring out. And the other was, I touched on this briefly as well also, treatment of animals. I am an avid animal lover. I have 2 rescue dogs. I know that Bill has a rescue dog as well. So and Ripper may not be an animal, quote unquote. For all we know, it's a sentient and extremely intelligent being. But for right now, we're seeing as an animal of sorts. And as that avid lover of animals, it was disgusting to me to see how it got treated. And as we talked about, we're the ones seeing that treatment, not necessarily the crew of the Discovery yet. But, you know, is this how humans in the future are going to deal with desperate times like war? Slavery, imprisonment of a creature that it knows nothing about? It really is sickening, and I hope it's not going to happen as Discovery unfolds into its entire season. So a lot of things to think about with this week's episode, and some of them are really, really tough to stay with.
But that's what's great about Star Trek, and that's why this show is Star Trek, is we can't, it's forcing us to look at the ugliness inside ourselves. And not just, you know, I know a lot of people are saying, I can't let my children watch this. But, you know, back in the 60s, TOS dealt with issues that nobody wanted to see. And the censors were always worrying about the violence and the messages that were going out. TNG, you know, ended its first season with a comical, now we look at the effects, but still pretty horrific death of a crew member who was infected when they phasered him and it exploded. DS9 didn't shy away from tough issues. Voyager tried sometimes, got it right sometimes. You know, this is Star Trek. Star Trek is not always going to be happy, you know, going back to Eden, yay, brother. It's got to, if we're not examining everything about ourselves, then what's the point?
You know, Rick, we reach. We really do. You know, I've said something now for several months that has not gained me any friends inside Star Trek fandom, and I'm happy to repeat it here. I've said it on Trek Geeks. I've said it in a number of places online, and it's this. Those people who don't see the Star Trek in this series don't want to see the Star Trek in this series, because it's there. It's been there since day one. There is that hope for the future. There is that humanity. But you know, there are sometimes we hold that mirror up to ourselves. We don't like the reflection it shows us. And I think that's true of what's going on with Discovery right now. Dan, you said it best. This is Star Trek, damn it. And it's damn good.
I don't think I could say it any better, my friend. And yeah, another great discussion about humanity this week. And I can't wait to see what next week is going to bring. But for right now, it is time for our weekly Starfleet commendations. So what I want you to do, Rick, is I want you to talk about 1, 2, or 3 different things that you want to specifically call out in this episode that you really loved, whether it be characters, performances, or scenes. Just brief call outs, and we'll hit on them really quick and see if any of us had the same thing.
Okay. My first call out, and I've already mentioned her once, is to Mary Chieffo as L'Rell, because she managed to not only be conversational with the language, and give a great performance. She has pulled off something no other actor in the Klingons has done yet, and that was subtlety. She was able to put forth a subtle performance through all of that makeup, and I was enthralled by her every move. And I'm sure that I honestly don't know what she looks like without the makeup. I'm sure she's, you know, quite lovely, but as alien as she looks, I was totally riveted by every word and every motion she made. So big shout out to her. When I know that we've talked about how reprehensible the Spore drive is, but the first time the ship saucer started spinning, I may have said a bad word in excitement. Just like the first time I saw Voyager's nacelles pivot up and lock before she goes into warp. I love that kind of stuff. And the last shout out goes to Jeff Russo for the music on this show. It is just incredible. It never intrudes on the scene, but it counterpoints everything that's going on so beautifully that I love it. It's wonderful.
It is wonderful. And I got to say one thing that I wanted to point out, Mary Chieffo is absolutely stunning outside of makeup, I'll say. I had the opportunity to see her in Hollywood a few weeks ago. And the other thing is her eyes when she's in Klingon makeup. She has eyes that just, you can tell, you can just watch her eyes and not even have the volume up and you can get an idea of what she's saying. I thought that was very well done also. For me, I touched upon this earlier. Sickbay on the Discovery. Oh man, was I happy to finally see Sickbay and hear Sickbay. Lovely call outs to TOS. And I got to say, those uniforms are spectacular. And it was great to finally see Wilson Cruz on screen as Dr. Culber. I think he's going to be great. But oh boy, did that look like a badly broken nose. I got to say that. Yeah. Cole. Oh boy, what a scumbag this guy is. And I mean that in the best way possible. He totally manipulated Voq when he showed up. And then when Voq was away, he swoops in and just takes over. It was very devious and smart. It kind of was Gowron politics times 10. And I was sitting there smiling when it happened. I thought it was brilliantly done. And the third thing I'm going to call out is Stamets and Lorca. That scene that we talked about earlier between the two of them and the disdain that Stamets has for the captain and what he's forcing his crew to do, knowing that it already killed an entire crew on the Glen. Great job by those guys. These two are really great characters, and I think it's going to be fun to watch what happens with them as the show goes forward. Bill, what do you think? What do you got for commendations, man?
Well, like the two of you, I've got some Klingon call-outs. I'm not going to lie. I love the Klingons. There's some really amazing world building and devious stuff going on here. I can't wait to see how it plays out. And in particular, I want to call out Cole. I am Team Cole, baby, all the way. I love this character. Kudos to Ken Mitchell for his portrayal and just how badass Cole really is. This is turning out to be one of my favorite Klingons in the history of Klingons. And then L'Rell. I have to say, I love Mary Chieffo, and I love the Shakespearean quality of L'Rell. There is so much to this character, and we have just barely gotten to know her so far. I think this is going to be a really interesting ride. And then I know I'm cheating a little bit with a fourth thing, but I know the producer of this show, and I'm going to take some liberties. I want to call out the writers and give them a special commendation. Dan, we know that they've listened to this podcast in the past. They've let us know. And I want to thank them for the work they're putting into these stories and this arc that they're building, because it's fantastic. And as a fan, it's something I've been waiting for a long time. So kudos to them for writing scripts that engage and create these great conversations, because that's the heart of Star Trek right there.
One of the things I love about the writers is that they are fans. They have said they're fans. They have invested so much into this because they love the genre just like we do. And we're seeing it with every single episode so far. They are investing all their time and energy into putting out a product that we as super fans are going to love. And I will allow the commendation based on that, sir. Don't overstep your boundaries, though, next week, okay?
Fair enough, sir. Thank you.
Okay.
Long-range scan of planet complete.
So here we are. it is time to look at our long-range scanners, and let's get some predictions for what we think is going to happen either next week with episode 5 or maybe further along down in the season. So let's start with you, Bill. You just had some great stuff to say. What do you think? What's going to happen next?
Well, Dan, a couple of weeks ago on Discovering Trek, I said that there may be a guy behind the guy, if you'll remember that prediction.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that guy behind the guy might actually be a woman. I think she's been the power behind T'Kuvma. I'm talking about L'Rell, of course. And I think she's going to assert herself very, very soon. Probably to the dismay of Call, my boy. And perhaps to his peril. That's my prediction.
Oh, wow. A little something for the red shot. Okay, that was good. The red shirt roll call later down the road, perhaps. Very
Mayhaps.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, Rick, what do you think? Next week, later on down the season, what do you got?
I'm not sure when, but also my prediction has to do with L'Rell as well. I think that the sacrifice of everything that she mentions to Vok at the end of the episode, I think that may have some, not just be a matter of ideological sacrifice or, he doesn't have any like house or standing or anything. I think this may be some sort of step towards the Klingons we're familiar with. There may actually be a physical transformation in line for Vok.
Ooh,
interesting.
Okay. I like that. Well, for me, for my prediction, not necessarily for next week. I mentioned it earlier, and I'll bring it up again. This whole Lorca Stamets headbutting, I think, is really going to boil over at some point, and something very interesting is going to happen. I don't know what it is, but I'm not throwing anything out the window at this point. It could be dire, but you don't just keep dressing down your captain, especially this particular captain, in front of other officers like Stamets has done when in engineering a couple weeks ago, or whether in sickbay this week, without being some kind of ramification for doing it. Something's going to happen, and I'm a little scared about what it might be.
I got to agree with you. Something's going to come to a head very soon.
Yeah.
Well, Dan, this week our friends at FanSense, they want to give away another glorious set of Discovery pins, if you can believe that. And Dan, it's so easy to enter this contest. All you need is a Twitter account, and you could win some awesome FanSense merchandise, my friend.
Absolutely. This week, in addition to the entire Series 1 set of Discovery pins, this is great. FanSets is going to throw in an exclusive New York Comic Con only pin. This pin is a gorgeous representation of the Discovery Delta with the USS Discovery in the middle of it. And in addition, the words Star Trek Discovery NYCC 2017 are seen along the left side of the Delta. It is absolutely gorgeous, and it was a convention exclusive. It's not available anymore, but it can be yours by simply entering our contest.
Dan, all you need to do is go to our page on Twitter at Discovering Trek. There you're going to see a pinned tweet with a picture of the pins available for this week's giveaway. Simply retweet it and use the hashtag #WinThesePins. It is just that simple.
Everyone who retweets our tweet and uses that special hashtag that Bill just mentioned will automatically be entered to win, and we'll announce the winner during next week's show. Once again, hashtag #WinThesePins. And as always, we thank FanSets for sponsoring today's episode. So, Bill, we're through 4 episodes already of both Star Trek Discovery and Discovering Trek. It's kind of cool that the numbers are kind of coincide with each other. So that's pretty cool. We got some good stuff coming up next week, too, I think, man.
We do. Dan, next time on Discovering Trek, we're going to take a look at Star Trek Discovery's 5th episode, Choose Your Pain. And joining us to break down the episode will be the Chief himself. Ken Tripp from Trek FM's Standard Orbit is going to beam in to talk about the developments in next week's episode and what humanity we might discover in it. Really looking forward to it. Plus, Dan, don't forget you can subscribe to this podcast by searching for Discovering Trek on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, iHeartRadio, or by heading to discoveringtrek.com. And for those of you on iTunes and Apple Podcasts, we truly would love it if you would rate and review the podcast. That will help other Star Trek fans find the show. Dan.
Thanks, man. Really appreciate it as always. And Rick, got to thank you so much for joining us to discuss some great Star Trek. Before we let you go, where can folks find you on social media and anywhere else on all those internets out there?
Okay. My shows are over at simplysyndicated.com, and I'm on pretty much all of them lately. But my main show is Starbase 66 there. It's a Star Trek and genre fiction podcast, and we have fun talking about all kinds of other stuff. You can find me on Facebook at, what is my Facebook name? It's Rick Whitgar Tetreault. That's Tetrault. And I'm always up for a conversation there. I'm on Twitter at adm.marius, Admiral Marius on Twitter. And I check in on there from time to time, and I'd love to talk to anyone about anything, but mostly I love talking about Star Trek.
As do we, my friend. Great to have you here. Thank you so much. And Bill, thank you as always for joining me this week. That's it for episode 4, my friends. And until next episode, from my perspective, I think this quote from Captain James T. Kirk in Gamesters of Triskelion sums up the last episode of Star Trek Discovery perfectly. A species that enslaves other beings is hardly superior, mentally or otherwise.
Music for Discovering Trek is provided by 5 Year Mission. They're writing one song for each episode of the original Star Trek. Download their music at 5yearmission.net. Discovering Trek, a Star Trek Discovery companion, is a production of Trek Geeks. Executive producer Dan Davidson. For even more Star Trek discussion, check out the Trek Geeks podcast, available on Apple Podcasts and TrekGeeks.com.